Hello friends, today I'm going to tell you about the movie Eddie the Eagle. The feed is based on real events. A 10-year-old kid breaks a personal record for holding his breath as much as 58 seconds, and inspired by his achievement, he goes to the Olympics. For the umpteenth time, a hard-working father picks him up at the bus stop. Young Englishman Eddie Edwards dreams of the Olympic Games, and his aspirations are not hindered even by the braces on his leg, which he has worn for years. Finally, the doctor took off the piece of iron, and the inspired bespectacled man began to train in the yard. However, they almost always ended with injuries and broken glasses. One day, his father's patience broke down and he decided to direct his son's energy in another direction. He yelled at him and made Eddie give up his dream, saying he wasn't an athlete. He hired him to teach him the plaster craft. However, there was a ski center nearby, and the boy realized that his purpose was to win medals not at the Summer Olympics, but at the winter ones. And over the years, training began to bring results. We are transported to 1988, when the English downhill team is presented to Olympic officials, which is immediately overwhelmed by the clumsy Eddie. The head of the committee takes the guy aside and assures him that he is unlikely to be able to compete at the Olympics, even though his results are no worse than the others. Perhaps it's time to give up his dream and learn a profession, as his father had been telling him since childhood. But Providence intervened again. Eddie caught sight of a program about ski jumping and the guy caught fire again. It turns out that England has not participated in the Olympics in this sport for 60 years. In the middle of a family dinner, Eddie breaks down and starts packing up to go to a training base in Germany. The father is indignant because of the dreamer's son, they do not get out of debt, and the mother worries, no matter how he breaks his neck. Arriving at the base, fascinated Edwards watches the flight of an outstanding athlete, Finn Mother and Newconen, and unsuccessfully tries to get his autograph. Multi-meter trampolines are intimidating and inspiring at the same time. Eddie had nowhere to go, and he climbed into the pantry of the cafe for the night. He is caught by the owner of the establishment, Petra, and she is ready to allow him to spend the night here in exchange for help at the bar. Also, if he wants, she will visit him at night. Eddie successfully masters the 15-meter springboard and immediately climbs to the 40-meter. However, this time he failed. The guy tried to get a couple of tips from the coach of the Norwegian team, but they only laughed at him because the bearded man's wards have been training since the age of 6, and Eddie is already 22 and he jumps only for the second day. So the guy decided to train on his own. After a dozen falls, a tough rat track driver approached the poor guy, who laughed at him and warned him not to let a layman climb a 70-meter springboard. It turned out that this grumpy man was Bronson Peary, a former member of the American national team, who was disgracefully kicked out of the team for drunkenness and indiscipline. Eddie has now come to him for advice in the garage. He admits in the epivo that he has dreamed of competing at the Olympics all his life and asks to train him, but gets an unequivocal no. The next day, Eddie watches as the Norwegian, the second in the world in this sport, gets injured while jumping from a 70-meter springboard. At the bar, he drinks milk to strengthen bones and woos Bronson. Another Norwegian is laughing at an alcoholic and a loser. The man tries to clean his turnip, but the bully coach stands up for the ward and knocks him out. A drunken Bronson gets a little drunk at the Norwegian training base and begins to reveal the theory of the jump to his young friend. Eddie needs to repeat the silhouette of the bird during the flight, and in the miniatures Bronson explains the danger of jumping from different trampolines. 40 meters are bruises, 70 are broken bones and the probability of not walking anymore, and 90 for an incompetent is a jump right into the coffin. Immediately, after his words, the drunkard climbs the highest springboard and goes to meet the assembled onlookers. The cowboy lands filigreed, which causes universal delight, because almost no one at the base knows about his past. This inspires Eddie, and using the tips of a drunken sensei, he finally conquers the 40-meter springboard. And in his opinion, he is already ready to go to the Olympics in Calgary. However, Bronson plants it and says that for the participants it is at least 70 meters and it takes athletes 4 years to master this springboard. But in exchange for a flask of booze, he gives Eddie permission to make a dangerous jump right now. Even the Norwegians are tense, and Perry is sure that the guy doesn't have the guts. From this height, the whole city is visible, and Eddie was seriously scared. He asks him to push, but quite accidentally started himself without even preparing. Looney had no chance, and a hard fall awaited him. Eddie is seriously injured, but even in the hospital with him is a book on learning to jump, which was written by former Bronson coach Warren Sharp. From it, the man learns that he has become the biggest disappointment of the coach in his career. He decides to take a serious approach to teaching the kid, as he realized that he would not stop. And here in a month there will be a ski jumping tournament. Absolutely everything is allowed, and if Eddie manages at least one jump from the 70-meter springboard, he will be able to go to the Olympics. As usual, everything starts with theory, and Bronson suggests that Eddie imagine making love with a hot actress during the jump. It's a pity, the kid is a layman in this business and he has to show everything. The day of the competition has come. All that is required of Eddie is just not to fall. He gathers and stays on his feet. With his, to put it mildly, mediocre jump of 34 meters, Eddie not only made his way to the Olympics, but also broke the national record set back in the 20s by several meters. But at a meeting with the Olympic Committee, Eddie is stunned by the fact that they have changed the regulations, and now only jumpers who have overcome distances of 61 meters are allowed into the national team, and all because such cranks and amateurs like Eddie are not interested in sponsors. There is nothing to do, you will have to participate in other competitions, but in order to get to them, he needs money, and he turns to his parents for help. The father refuses to finance his son, and the next day Eddie steals his van. And the mother, behind her husband's back, gave the guy the savings set aside by the hard worker for a new van. Eddie comes to train with Bronson. Now they need more serious equipment, and they find it among the things lost at the base. After not the most successful training sessions, mainly aimed at developing balance, the guy begins to attend competitions. 43 meters in Austria, 49 in Switzerland. A persistent athlete feels more and more confident, both on skis and during exercises. There was one last chance at the competition in Germany. During the training jump, Eddie managed to fly exactly 61 meters. Now you need to repeat for the test. The moment of truth has come. And, alas, Eddie fell. There was no protection jump. Bronson calms the poor guy down and praises his flying technique. Eddie apologizes to his parents and promises to stop with nonsense. The guy is finishing up the last week with Petra. And then he receives a notification that the result of his 61-meter training jump was recorded, which means he fulfilled the conditions of the Olympic Committee. But Bronson is not particularly happy. He offers to train for another 4 years so that Eddie is a contender and not just a participant. After all, of course, he will take the last place at this Olympiad. But the guy doesn't listen to him. Eddie and the national team arrived in Canada and is settling in the Olympic Village. Another athlete calls on the guy to fulfill the tradition and drink 5 stacks of colorful hot drinks, symbolizing the Olympic rings. Alas, it was only an excuse to make fun of the dandy, and he overslept the exit of his national team at the opening ceremony of the Olympics. The day of the 70-meter springboard jumping competition has come. Mother and Nukanen jumps 114 meters on the first attempt. And here is the participant from the UK, Eddie Edwards. His parents and Petra and Bronson are watching his attempt on TV. And the Englishman doesn't even fall after the jump. Commentators make fun of his style, and the result of 60.5 meters becomes a new national record. The audience does not understand whether they should be happy, but Eddie himself is absolutely delighted, and he charges everyone with positivity. In Euphoria, the boy portrays a bird and gets the nickname Eagle from the commentator. Alas, this was Eddie's first and last performance, as he showed the worst result, and he is not ready for the 90-meter springboard. Although he is a member of the national team, he was not allowed to go to the lock with other athletes. The guy is simply not taken seriously. The press secretary brought Eddie to a press conference with a bunch of journalists. He became the most discussed athlete at this Olympics. But Bronson, as always, is straightforward and scolds Eddie for making a fool of himself. That evening, Eddie gathers all the journalists again. He apologizes for the ridiculous behavior after his jump and announces that he is ready to continue participating and jump from the 90-meter springboard. His mentor Bronson flew to support the ward. He charges the guy with confidence. So, it's time to jump from a 90-meter long springboard. One of the participants has already broken down. Pyre's former coach is on TV and speaks unfavorably about him. The stands are chanting Eddie the Eagle, and Bronson is giving final instructions. He takes the elevator up with the flying Finn himself, who has already managed to win a medal. He also inspires Eddie to a local feat. Maddie performs a perfect jump, and now Eddie has to perform after the champion. And this is his first jump from this height, the jump of his whole life. Eddie takes too long to gather his courage, and they started hurrying him. Gaining a frenzied speed, the eagle flew and screamed at the top of his lungs. Both parents and Norwegians are worried about him. Not keeping his balance, the athlete fell on his back, but then he was able to get up, so his jump was counted 71.5 meters. Eddie broke the personal record and the UK record again. Warren Sharp enters the locker room and leaves Pyrie an autograph on the book that he used to coach Eddie. He also praises the Eagle and apologizes for his words about Bronson. Eddie the Eagle became the first athlete to be mentioned in a speech at the closing of the Olympic Games. The athlete returned to his homeland as a national hero and, most importantly, his father is finally proud of him. After Eddie Edwards' participation in the Winter Olympics in Calgary, the International Olympic Committee adopted a rule that became known as the Eddie the Eagle rule. It states that an athlete applying to participate in the Olympic Games must first prove himself in other international competitions, the World or European Championships, and enter either the top 50 athletes at these competitions or among the top 30% of the best results. That's all for today. Put likes and write comments if you want more similar videos.